All right, y'all. Well, good evening, everyone. Tonight, Penn State World Campus Tech Club is welcoming speaker WebWitch to present to us an introduction to Burp Suite. WebWitch is a player ambassador for the National Cyber League, as well as a security consultant working primarily in their company's web application pen test service line. Outside of work, they cross-stitch and spend their time giving presentations to local hacker spaces to show others that cybersecurity isn't such a scary field to get into. WebWitch, thank you for coming.
Hi there. Nice to be able to present to you all. I guess let me see if I can get my screen share going. Oh, host disabled participant screen sharing. Could I please have that?
Absolutely, give me a moment.
Anyway, while we're getting that all set up, essentially I'm just going to be going over just as much as I know about Burp Suite. This is definitely not the end-all be-all guide to how to use Burp Suite. It is what I have learned over the past year and a bit, both using this in the National Cyber League competition and using it at work constantly. I will probably miss some stuff. I dislike PowerPoints, so I'm literally doing this live. We'll see how that goes. It always ends up being a bit of a coin flip, but I'm going to go through what is Burp Suite, how to get it, how to install it on your computer properly so that your browser doesn't yell at you, and all stuff like that. So let me get my screen up here.
Yeah, sorry about that. You should be able to share your screen now.
Yeah, give me one moment. Oh, can I? Okay, I can't see anything else, but you guys can. Okay, perfect. So first things first, what is Burp Suite? Burp Suite is a proxy tool that allows you to view and edit the requests that your browser is making to a web application. When you are doing web testing for an application, this is crucial because you're going to want to be able to change small things and send it back to the application to see how it responds, and that's generally how you go about testing a web app for various vulnerabilities. Where you download it is on Portswigger's website. You will be generally downloading the community edition unless you or someone you know has paid for a professional version. You can download the latest version here. You do have to make an account with them. Once you do that and get it installed, I'm actually going to just close it so that I can reopen it up and show all of you what it looks like. You will be able to only do a handful of things. Community Edition does have some limited capabilities because, again, they do want you to buy professional, but professional is kind of expensive. But for CTFs and whatnot, Community will do. You'll be able to create temporary projects, which means that nothing actually saves on your computer. So if you do close it, just be aware that all of the data that you have there is going to go away. So if there's anything you want to save, make sure that you copy it to some kind of document so you can look at it later. There is the possibility that you can load different settings from a configuration file. That would be something you can either create yourself if there are specific needs that you have when you load up Burp Suite. I know that my company has us use a specific configuration file for our company, but beyond that, I didn't really see a need to use it. So you can just generally use the Burp defaults for things. Once you start Burp, you're going to have a wonderful screen pop up that sometimes, and I can say this from personal experience, looks kind of daunting if you have no idea what's going on. But here are the basics. This part of the application isn't actually there in the community version. This is what they want you to see so that you can be like, oh, that looks nice, and then buy the professional version. But we'll just hide that for now. This is your dashboard. This is all of the live tasks that you have going, and it will tell you what traffic is currently being processed and where it's at with those. You can ask it to do passive crawls from the proxy, so you'll have requests coming through your browser and into Burp Suite, and it will spider through a couple of those and see if it will let you know if it finds anything, or it will add stuff to your sitemap. And I'll get into what that is later, just in a second. Essentially, I will close this now. This is an application, open source vulnerable application called Zero Bank. Anyone can visit this and just play around with it, and it allows you to use some of the basic tools. If we go into Burp Suite, you will see that there's this Proxy tab. This is where you are able to control whether or not the requests that are being made from your browser are being intercepted by Burp. If the intercept is off, if I make a request, it won't capture it, but if I turn it on and try and sign into this app, it will tell you what exactly is being sent to the application and all of the different details associated with that. So for example, with this request, we've got a sign in. They'll tell you it's a post request, all the necessary headers that you need to know. And it'll show you all of the parameters that are in like the post request. And you'll be able to go in and edit these before you are able to forward it on to the application. If I forward this in, I'm almost entirely certain that it will not log me in because I don't think that's a set of credentials. But now that we have passed that request through Burp, we can go back to the target tab. The target tab is really useful because it'll show you all of the requests that your browser has made to different like sites while it's been open. You'll notice that we have a request here, or a section here for 0.webappsecurity.com, and the requests that it has made so far that it has captured. One of the great things about Burp is that if you are specifically attacking one singular website, you can have Burp zero in on that so you don't have to see the traffic from other things. Like for example, we don't necessarily want to intercept the traffic from Google and Bing and Yahoo. Like that's not really conducive to the testing. So we can right click on this part of the section and we can say add to scope. Once you say add to scope, you can go to the scope tab here and you will see that it defines, you can add a bunch of different URLs to this, but in this case, we have added one URL that is our in scope, so it will only proxy traffic from that URL, which is great. So now we still have these other URLs in our like sitemap of all the things that we've requested so far. If you go into this section here and just click on it, left click on it normally, you'll see a bunch of different options. This allows you to filter all of the different pages that your browser has requested. So if we want to only see things that are in scope, we can tick this box called show only in scope items. Showing only requested items is things that you manually have requested. The sitemap will also be populated by things that are running in the dashboard. For example, some of those basic scans that I was talking about, where it would spider through the application based on requests that you've made. And if you don't want to see those, then you can show only requested items. If you're looking specifically for a request that has a parameter in it that you need to take a look at, like for example, post requests that have different parameters in the body or something that has a parameter in the URL, you can say show only parameterized requests and it will show you those specific requests instead of things that are just running in the background, like maybe getting a .js file or something like that. So if we click on this and there's also some other things in here. You can also filter by status code. So if you don't want to see things that are 400s or 500s, you can click or you can check or uncheck these boxes and then it will filter accordingly. Once you've finished deciding what you want your filters to be, you can just click out of this box and it will apply it to your sitemap. So now you've focused in all of your information on just this website, which is great. Going back to, I'm just going to go over this tab. This is all of the definitions of issues that can be detected by Burp Scanner. That was the thing that popped up over here. You won't necessarily be able to use that, but it's good to know sometimes. And also, it gives you the CWEs of all of these different vulnerabilities that you might be finding while you're doing like a web application, like test, for example. So it's always good to have like a little reference point, but I will honestly say that I have not gone back and referenced it a ton myself. Sometimes I might need to though. So now that we have 0.webappsecurity as our scope, we can go back to the Proxy tab and start playing around a little bit with the requests here. So I don't actually have I don't have an account on this site. So if I were to try and play around with the login page to see what I could get out of it, we would make a request, make sure the intercept is on, and no, please don't save. So we'll be able to take a little deeper look at this request. We tested this earlier, and obviously this didn't work, but it can be really annoying if you're going back and having to make the same request over and over again. So they would have a really fun tool in this called Repeater. If you take any request that comes through your proxy or in your HTTP history, but I'll show that in a second, you can right-click and you can send to any one of these tabs. You'll notice that these options are the same ones that are up here. They also have some other things that are obviously only in the pro version, and there are a lot of different things here that you can use. You can just specifically copy the URL that this was requesting. You can copy it as a curl command. You can decide to specifically intercept the response to this request in this screen. That can be really useful if you're looking for something specific in the response. If Burp does accidentally get a request that you really don't want to see and are having an annoying time with it, you can say don't intercept request, and then you have a couple of options as to what exactly you don't want to see. But in this case, we can send this request to Repeater, and we will play around with that a little bit later. I'm going to forward this request on in the meantime. HTTP history is exactly what it sounds like. This is the history of all the requests that you have made to the application up until you have defined a scope. Otherwise, it'll just be for the one application that you have, one or multiple URLs that you've decided as in scope. But in this case, we've only made a couple of requests to 0.webappsecurity, and like the target tab, we can also go into this and decide to have it show only in-scope items, so we don't get bogged down with a bunch of other requests. And see, it gets all nicely cut down. We can do the same things here that we can do in the intercept tab. For example, if I wanted to take a look at one of these requests and go back, and maybe I wanted to send this request, or actually this request to Repeater instead, I could click on it here, right-click, and decide what tool I wanted to send it to. Speaking of tools, in HTTP history, you can also take a look both at the request and the response. It'll naturally have it loaded in here unless it didn't get a response from the application that you're working on. And it will show you just literally all of it'll show you everything. If this is not exactly useful in this moment and there's a lot of text, you can also choose to render, and it will show you what the application looks like with its actual response. So if you needed to go back and reference something, but you didn't want to pull the whole application up again, you can just go back and be like, oh, that's what it looked like after this thing happened, which could be useful in some cases where you're looking for a visual cue of something that changed. That can be really helpful. The other little bits and bobs here are parameters and headers, which are exactly what they sound like. This is specifically looking to tell you in a very well-formatted way what the headers or the parameters of this request are. If you are sending this into Repeater, for example, you can click on these same tabs and then go in and edit. You will notice that you are unable to edit these things while they're in history because it's your history and it's the request that you made, not edited requests. There's also a tab for WebSockets. I could not give a good explanation of what WebSockets are. It's just a different way that some web applications interact with your browser, and they can sometimes be really annoying. But they do have a whole tab for intercepting that same kind of traffic, and you are able to do similar things with WebSocket requests that you are able to do with regular requests. The Options tab allows you to define various different parts of the application in relation to the proxy itself. You can have it set to intercept both requests and responses. Generally, at its base, it will only intercept requests and will only intercept responses if it specifically asked for it. But for example, if I selected intercept responses based on the following rules, and the content type matches text, essentially if it has something that comes back, it would show in the in the intercept tab both. I'll actually show you what that looks like real quick. Let me sign in with something arbitrary again. I don't think I get locked out of this application. If I do, that would be sad. So if I were to go here and I were to say options, normally if I forwarded this on, I wouldn't see anything else. But in this case, if I turned this on and then forwarded this request on, it would, well, this is another request that actually shouldn't be here, but it will give me the response, which is this 302 response into that, in response to that last request. Sometimes that can get a little bit cluttering if you're just trying to send off or just look at the requests that your browser is making. So generally it stays off. It can be useful sometimes, but it really depends on the person. The same kind of changes can be made for the WebSocket messages. And another good thing to know in the list of miscellaneous options that you can have is the don't send items to proxy, history, or live tasks if out of scope. Now that we have defined the scope, and that is the option that keeps all of the other requests from different websites cluttering your intercept proxy here. Moving on to the next tab, which is repeater. This is, everything here is pretty aptly named. You are able to repeat requests that you had previously sent. So if I have this request that had been sent previously, I can send this request and it will show me the response right here, which can be really useful because sometimes you will need to make small edits to a request and see how that changes the response. And for example, if I send that in and follow the redirection, well, or it might just be having a slight meltdown. It might be having a slight meltdown. It's having a little bit of a meltdown. One of the things you will note is that when I made this request, if it does find a 302, let me send this again, it has the option to follow the redirection, which means that if you don't necessarily need what's on this page, but you want to see where that takes you, you can click that button and it will make the request and be able to tell you what it was being redirected to, which can be really useful. This also has the same tabs as the other parts of Burp, which has parameters, headers, the hex values of the whole thing. I'll be perfectly honest with you, I haven't used hex a lot, but parameters and headers can be really useful if the application that you're working with is sending a lot of them, and it's very hard to read all of them just in a raw chunk of text. So these are, good in their general use cases. Intruder is a part of the application that is very much like Repeater, but it makes a bunch of requests in succession. The downside of this part of the application in the community version is that all of the requests that you are able to send are throttled. So in the pro version, you are able to send a lot of requests in a very short period of time, but this one is throttled down to, I believe, 1 thread, and so all the throttle is like fixed. So you can't speed it up, unfortunately, but I mean, they need to make you pay for something, I suppose. So I guess I can't fault them for having, a product that they're trying to sell. So when you have I'm going to do this real quick again. Love this login page. I hope everyone's really excited to see more of the login page. Like before, we will take a request from the proxy and we will send it to Intruder. Once we send it to Intruder, we will have a couple of different options. The target, it will ask for the host and the port. So this is just making sure that it's going to the correct website. And if you need to make any changes to that, that's where that would be changed here. The positions page, this is where you define what places. So the point of Intruder is that you are able to take lists of possible inputs, and this part of the application will request those all of those inputs in succession. So for example, if you had a very short password list for a potential user, you could have Intruder go through all of those different passwords, and it will tell you what the response is if it like gets the correct password or something like that. So in this case, there are a couple different buttons here on the side. You'll notice that in this request that we have sent in here, it has auto highlighted a handful of different areas. For example, it'll highlight anything, not anything, but like pretty much anything that comes after an equal sign because it recognizes it as a parameter. That's not always necessarily useful, and sometimes you just want to submit things. Sometimes you just want to submit things to a couple of different of the parameters and not all of them. So in this case, we're going to hit clear, and it will clear out all of these different locations. To add a location, you can either highlight a section. For example, if I highlighted this and then pressed add, it would create the little tokens on the side that would highlight that part. Or you can put your cursor at a certain spot, and if you press add, it will insert one of these characters. You have to have two of these characters to create a matched set, and it will insert the payloads that you have into those locations. So I'm going to put sections at both the login and the password. You'll notice up here that there's a list of different attack types: sniper, battering ram, pitchfork, and cluster bomb. I'm not going to go over all of them. If you do want to know what they all do, you can click the question mark next to payload positions, and it has a extremely thorough documentation on what exactly it does and how it works. In this case, I can tell you that sniper is a very, directed attack on a specific parameter, which means that if I were to load a list of passwords or usernames, it would just go through them sequentially, directed at one singular payload target, or at one of these targets. The other one, and this is the one that I use the most often, generally for enumerating through like ID numbers of different things. And then cluster bomb is the other one that I use very often if I have two sections that have to submit different sets of payloads. So cluster bomb will enumerate through all of the different, permutations of payloads. So for example, if you had 3 different usernames and 3 different passwords that you wanted to try, it would test each of the usernames with all of the passwords and so forth. So going into payloads, this is where this gets important. So there are payload sets. You'll notice that we have 2 available payload sets. If I were to take one of these out of here, I'll just take both out and then add one in. You'll notice that we only have the option to add a payload set for one of them. They will be also, just note, like in order of which they appear in the request. So if you have one that was up here and one that was here and here, this would be 1, this would be 2, and this would be 3. So just keep that in mind when you're putting things in for your payloads. So now that we're going to be here, we're going to define our payload sets. You have a lot of different options for what you can do here. Simple list is where you are able to load individual items in just literally in a list here. You can't add from a file in the community version, so you would literally have to copy and paste the list that you have, which in this case, I prepped beforehand. Hopefully this works. Essentially, you might have to add the items individually, or nope, you can just paste it if it's in your clipboard. I couldn't remember. Now, we can go to payload type 2, and that would be, in this case, where the passwords are. You can paste from here. And if we go back and forth between these two payload sets, these are the payloads that will be sent to the application. There's also some payload processing you can do, which is essentially like you can add rules that change the inputs that you have given so far. Like, for example, if you were trying to send in a password and you knew that it had to have like numbers at the beginning and end, but you also had a list of possible passwords as to what like the word itself could be. The processing rule you could do is like, oh, well, you can add like suffixes or do some match and replace for different characters. I can say that I don't actually use this a whole lot, but it can be useful in different circumstances. Oh, let me leave. There we go. So there's also a couple of other options, but again, the request engine can't really be changed because it's not the pro version. There are like different things that you can extract from requests. So for example, this is actually one of my favorite tools. I don't have a good request to make an example of at the moment, but there are some times where you can make requests especially if you're enumerating through like IDs and it returns like maybe a different item name or something like that. You can go into, well, this isn't a good one. But essentially, let's say that there was actually a lot of text here, and maybe every time that this request was made, this part changed, and it had a piece of information that I really needed and would like to see. You can highlight a specific piece of text that you know will be in a specific position every single time you make this request, and you'll see, I'm actually just gonna add this one for an example when I make these requests here, but it will create a column in the request list that will show you what the results of that grep are for each of the requests that you have made. This can be, I've found this to be extremely useful for like client projects. I'm not entirely sure how useful it'll necessarily be for CTFs, but just as a note, this can be extremely useful. The other bits and pieces of this, I'll be honest, I haven't used a whole lot of, so there's not a whole lot that I can speak to on those. But once you've finished setting up your payloads and the payload types, you will see that it'll tell you what the total request count is for this attack. And once you feel that you've set up everything as necessary, you'll be able to say, start attack. And it will pop up, some functionality is disabled, attacks are time throttled. I am aware of that, that's why I made a short list. Anyway, so you'll see that it'll show you what it is. Yeah, there we go. It'll show you what it is using for both payload 1 and payload 2. So you're able to run through all of these, and you can see if I click on one of these, it will give me the response. Again, this is another 302. But one of the things that I found really useful, surprisingly, is the length column. Sometimes you're going to be making a bunch of requests to something, and the response won't necessarily, it won't be super clear as to whether or not there's something that's changing. But you will notice that all of these requests that I can tell you for a fact have failed are a very specific length, and you will see that this request has more data in it, saying that it is responded with something, like it is responded positively to something I've sent in. You can actually see where the issue lies, where the location that's being 302 to, it'll tell you that there's a login error for this one, but since the login is literally username and password, you can see that it in fact correctly logged in and will be rerouted to the accept certs user token whatnot page. This can be really helpful because you can then take these two payloads and go back to your proxy and then use these payloads in your actual request. You can also, where is it? One moment, I have to go find it. There's also a fun little thing where you can highlight all of these different options, and you can, where is it? Ah, there it is, sorry. Oh no. Oh. I lied. This is a pro thing. In Pro, you are able to save the results of the attack that you just did on the web application, which can be really useful to go back and reference if you need what combinations of payloads worked for a specific part of the application and whatnot. I think I saw something about here in the chat. I don't know. I'm having difficulty actually being able to see the chat. I actually don't think I can see the chat. Oh, there it is. I know a part of a flag, it could be handy. Ah, yes. Yeah, if you know a part of a flag, or specifically, for example, like in the NCL, sometimes there are requests. Well, I guess that technically is for passwords, but you know, there's like a 4-digit number at the end of the request, or at the end of the flag. So like maybe there's a request that you could enumerate through, and there's the option, I'll show you real quick, to, you know, use numbers, which is, this is the one I use the most often. I don't even use the list very often. I use numbers specifically. You will be able to add numbers from a certain number to, you know, let's say we're looking for a 4-digit number. You can say what the step is. So you can either have it go like, you know, every single number, or maybe it'll be every other number. Just depends on what you need. And you can have it, you can set the max and min integer digits. So for example, you don't have to necessarily put anything here, but if I knew that a certain payload area needed a 4-digit number, but I didn't want to write, you know, 0001, or, you know, even if I did send that in, sometimes Burp would just process that as 1 and insert that into the position. You can say that the minimum number of integer digits would be 4. So when it does get inserted into the, I love when words escape me. When it gets inserted into where the payload is supposed to go, it will format it like this instead of just sending it in like this. That can be important in some use cases. Again, it really just all depends. Again, same thing with the max integer digits, but generally you kind of know where to end because you'll be putting the highest number in there. But yes, these are all, the intruder can be really useful for enumerating through things, or if you just need to send like a lot of like test passwords at a thing. The other, sequencer is, I genuinely don't understand sequencer. I use this tool for a living and I don't get what sequencer is. I have a general idea, but I've never found it to be handy, and that's a personal opinion. I will say it's a personal opinion, but I cannot speak to anything about sequencer. I don't know how it works. I'm sorry. So in Decoder, it does exactly what you would expect it to do. You can send information to Decoder. So for example, if I highlighted something and then said send to Decoder, it would pop up in Decoder and you'd be able to do stuff with it. So for example, if we thought that I don't think this is, but if this payload was just hex encoded, for example, we can decode as hex, and it will give us the decoded payload here, and it will highlight certain sections with the like associated color based on what it's being decoded with. You can also encode stuff. So for example, if I have a test payload, I spelled that wrong, but we're just going to have to deal. You can also choose to encode it as anything you need to. So for example, if I needed to encode this as base 64, this is great just like for a copy paste if you need to send a very specific type of payload in a parameter for something. You can do it back and forth. You can also do it in layers, essentially. So this section has different options than this section. This is getting encoded as something. You can decide to encode this again as base 64, and it will just keep layering what it is on. You can also choose to decode it, though that doesn't really make sense because we're already here. But like, you can see kind of how it works, and if you need to encode something multiple times or whatnot, this can be really useful. I do know we did have one challenge during the summer challenges that did some kind of the layered kind of encoding stuff. So this would be a useful tool to unwrap all those different encodings. Comparer, its functionality is written up here. It lets you do a word or byte level comparison between different like requests or responses. This can be really useful, I would say, for me specifically, when you're testing parts of an application that presumably are supposed to have the same response for both, you know, I think the best example is when you're trying to log into an application, and fundamentally, if you try and log in, they're not supposed to tell you like, oh, this account exists, but you got the password wrong. They're supposed to tell you, well, something went wrong. We're not going to tell you what it is, but that login didn't work. And sometimes applications do this really well, but because sometimes those responses can be coded differently, you can have very minute differences between those responses between accounts that exist and accounts that don't exist. So sometimes you are able to enumerate existing accounts based on minutia, like minute changes in responses. And this is where Comparer can come in handy, because you can send 2 requests or 2 responses to this and compare them on a word by word or byte by byte level, and it will tell you if there are any differences. Now, when you make 2 requests at different times, like obviously there's going to be like there's going to be a little time parameter that will change, but there might be something tacked on in like a comment or whatnot that you wouldn't necessarily know or pay attention to normally, but this will actually show you all of the individual differences. I haven't used it a ton personally, but it has come in handy on very specific cases. I feel like I'm saying that a lot, and I probably sound like a broken record, but like everything in security sometimes at a certain point comes down to, it's a case-by-case basis. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So Extender, at first I didn't really know what this was when I was starting out with Burp, but essentially there are a series of applications that people have written and sent out to the public so that they can add on different functionality to a Burp Suite. You'll notice that there are some applications that do require professional Burp. I think it requires Burp. Give me a larger, oh, wow. I just wanted to see, okay. Anyway, requires Burp Suite Professional. Sorry, I don't know why the columns on this are so weird. I'm not gonna go through every single application in the store because that would be buck wild, no offense. But they do have, their titles, their community rating. Generally, if it's really nice to be able to sort by community rated things and how popular they are and things that can be really useful. Some of the things that I suggest looking into are somewhere. Where'd they go? Like when you're dealing with JSON web tokens, these applications can be useful. We've got Logger++, which will show you not just the HTTP history of the things that you have requested, but also the HTTP history only records the requests that are made and go through this proxy or this intercept tab here. So if you have any of these other parts of the application, parts of Burp make requests, it won't log them there. But Logger++ extends the logging capabilities and also logs what you send in through these. I've had some kind of a hit and miss with it sometimes, but it can be useful if you're like, oh wait, what did I closed that tab? I don't have the information anymore. What did I send? Also, a fun little thing that I forgot about is you can name these tabs, which can be really useful when you've got like 60 of them open, and that's not a exaggeration. Sometimes you get a lot of repeater tabs open at the same time. And you can name them and be like, oh, this is what this is for, and it can be good for organizing your workspace. But yeah, so there are a couple of things in here. If you want to install them onto Burp, you literally just click install, and it will do its thing, and it will pop up as an extra tab up here as soon as it's done. There we go. So now we have Logger++. It pops up here with its various different options. Again, not going over everything that these things can do, but it is good to like read the documentation, see what features it has, and maybe you can find something that'll be useful in a CTF. Project options and user options. Project options are, at the very beginning of this, you probably noted that you were not able to save projects to your disk. So this doesn't necessarily come in handy as much, but there are user options. These options will carry over between, what would normally carry over between different projects. I think I still do, actually. Like things like platform authentication, like basic and NTLM and stuff like that. If like this, honestly, this is not, I haven't seen this happen in an NCL CTF, probably happens in other CTFs, but like basically it'll send the correct like header with these credentials, with the credentials you enter here and in the correct encoding and stuff like that. You can add these, and so it will automatically do those when you send things via like the intercept tab or like Intruder or repeater, stuff like that. It'll just automatically do that, which is very nice, because some applications will yell at you if you don't. There's also different TLS and display options. I know everyone is probably looking at this and going, wow, that's very bright. If you want it to be dark, you can just go to Darkula. I know everyone, all those hackers love their dark workspaces. So if you just want it dark, you go to Darkula. This is where it is. The most important thing of this entire talk, obviously. Anyway, the changes will take effect when Burp is restarted. It obviously won't change immediately. You can change your hotkeys. I've never used basic. Oh, I have used automatic project backup, but that's in the pro version, so I don't have to go over that. Project options, there are some things in here that will override the overall user options. Like, so for example, if you normally need certain types of platform authentication, but you're doing one project that doesn't need it, you can either remove it from your entire user options, which may just be something you don't want to do, or you can go into the individual project options and override the user options that will be specifically used for the project you have open. That goes the same for the proxy servers and the SOX proxy and various out-of-scope request stuff and whatnot. Basically, it just ends up being like a bunch of different options that you can go in and change the way that Burp interacts with certain things to make sure that your user experience is the best user experience that you can have. There's a lot of stuff in here, but I'm not going to go over all of it because at a certain point you should just kind of read up on what they do and change things around to best suit you. That's kind of most of everything. I forgot to do this at the very beginning and I just realized this, but for Burp to work in harmony with whatever browser you are using, you will have to tell, hold on, I'm proxying something, aren't I? Ah, yes, okay. Let me release that into the wild. You will actually have to tell your browser that traffic that is being like sent and intercepted from this proxy is okay. You have to tell it that it's fine. The way to do that is when you have opened up Burp Suite, it will start a listener on 127,001. Oh, I should know this. Oh my God. Goodness. Anyway, yes, sorry. It starts with a listener on 127,001 at port 8080. So what you will need to do is once you've opened this up, I'm going to pretend like I don't have anything set up at the moment. I think I can do this. Yeah. So let's pretend I didn't have all my proxy stuff set up. What you'd want to do is you want to go to that address. Please. There we go. And it will open up this basic page for Burp Suite Community Edition. What you want to do is you want to download the CA certificate, and you want to save that file. and then you will go into your browser's options, scroll all the way down to network settings, and oh, where is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. First, you will find where the certificates are, and I can't remember where it is. I think I passed it. Oh no. This is always the worst part of this. I always forget where this specific thing is, no matter how many times I've done it. Ah, there we go. Okay, so you go to privacy and security, and then you go to view certificates, and then you go to, excuse me, and then you go to your certificate, nope, authorities, and then you will import that file into this so it recognizes that all the requests coming from Burp are okay. And then once you do that, what you're going to want to do is then you're going to actually want to proxy your traffic from your browser to Burp, which means that you're going to have to set the proxy for your browser. That's when you scroll down to network settings and you use, there's two ways to do this. You can either use manual proxy configuration, which you would again type in the 127.0.0.1 at port 8080, or you can use my favorite tool, and yes, I will say it is my absolute favorite tool, called Foxy Proxy. It is just a little extension where you can go in, I'm going to do system proxy settings. You can go in with options, and you can add a different proxy setup. This is, I mean, it can be useful if you have a bunch of different proxies that you use, but this is just really easy to turn Burp Suite on and off. You can go in, you can add one, you can give it a title. This is Burp 2 now. And you can give it the address that it is at, the port. I know how to type. And you will say, you can give it a color too. For some reason, I always think that Burp Suite is purple. That's just how it is in my brain. And you can save this. So when you click on Foxy Proxy, you can click on this and it will, or one of the options that you have created, and it will automatically start sending traffic to Burp here. That is what you need to know about Burp setup. I know that can trip some people up, and there's really good documentation on PortSwigger's website about all of this, but sometimes it's a little bit easier if someone just visually walks you through it. So that is that's kind of it. I'm gonna be honest. Does anyone have any specific questions or things that they would like me to maybe go over a little bit more? Do 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 do. All right. Well, if nobody has any questions, then I will stop sharing my screen and hope everyone has a good rest of you. I'm realizing it's your guys' evening. It's like 6 p.m. for me. So yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming out, and thank you, WebWitch, for coming to speak to our club. We really appreciate the time that you take for others' professional development. So yeah, thank you again, and please come back anytime.
Sure, if I ever think of anything else to talk about, but it was great talk. It was great to be able to present to you guys, and I hope to see you around, maybe in the NCL.
Yeah, I really look forward to working with you there.
All right. Well, have a good rest of your night.
You too.